welcome everyone. 2019 and Atlas is bringing out a lot of new initiatives, and one of them is certainly this, joined by my colleague James Ridley, who's also the other director of Atlas Wealth Management. You'll either be hearing this on our podcast or via YouTube or Facebook, so wherever you're watching or listening to this, please make sure you like, follow and subscribe. So we've got a lot planned for 2019. James, how are we doing?
Yeah, we do. I mean, every month we're aiming to put out 2 Ask Atlases, and that's going to be a bit more of a topic about, legislative updates. Obviously, we're going to open up Q&A for Ask Atlas, and then we're also going to be doing a bit of a monthly webinar with a specialist. So who are we actually talking to soon?
Yeah, this month, on the 28th of February, we've got Glenn Hines from Australia America Tax Services.
Yes, that'd be great.
And he's pretty much going to run through the top 10 problems that Aussie expats face with US tax. So both of us know, and so do our clients, how difficult US tax is for them. Oh, yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing, that, there is no commonality or no standard template that people follow. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, so hopefully Glenn can sort of guide us through all the trials and tribulations and put Aussie expats in the US onto a straight path. So
yeah, that's right. Provide a bit of clarity. I mean, there's so many things that you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know when you get over there, and hopefully it's going to provide a bit of guidance and maybe ask questions that you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, as James said, certainly with the Ask Atlas sessions, 2 of those a month. And virtually they're going to be just chats. Yeah. We're going to talk about certainly issues and case studies that we're dealing with on a weekly basis. But we'd like to employ everyone out there and overseas that do have questions. Certainly hit us up on both our Facebook or YouTube channels or Twitter feeds. If you even want to use the hashtag AskAtlas, that'll help us. We can monitor social media, and when those questions pop up, we'll certainly be able to answer those questions. So obviously this is the first session of what will be a lot. So we don't have any questions yet, but I think what we're going to do today is certainly run through some of the key and major issues we're dealing with right now.
Yeah.
Top of that list would have to be the main residence exemption.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, already, if you go to our blog, you can see a lot of the feedback and ongoing guidance and everything that we provide on there. But yeah, this retrospective draft piece of legislation, which is the clock's ticking. I mean, 3rd of June 2019, that's when they stated that as of that date, that's when the repercussions start technically. And we haven't received too much of an update, but yeah, let's divulge into it. Let's pull it apart.
Yep.
And obviously find out why it is so damaging.
Well, I think the key point is the retrospective nature.
Yes.
The fact that you could have been fortunate enough to purchase the house in Bondi for $500,000 in the mid-90s.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, that's right. Good for you if you could get it.
Yep.
And if you were to move overseas, say 2015, you've held the property for the better part of sort of 20 years.
Yep.
And even though for whatever reason you sell that property when you're overseas, even though you lived in it for 20 years as your principal place of residence, there's no preservation of that tax status, is there? No. Essentially what it means is potentially if this legislation does go through, you may pay capital gains tax all the way back to 1995 when you bought the house.
Exactly. And I mean, what's also not really clear, especially in the explanatory memorandums, is technically a former main residence. It's a different type of asset class to just a standard investment property. Now they're saying that if we sell that property after 3rd of June 2019, we incur the CGT. We don't get a partial main residence exemption at all, which is ridiculous. And then you've also got to factor in the fact that non-resident marginal tax rates are higher. No tax-free threshold, 32.5% on the first dollar, up to 90,000, and again and again. And because it is technically a different asset class, and as we know, the CGT discount method, 50% CGT discount method went out the window 2012.
2012, yep.
How does that correspond to the main residence? Yeah. And this main residence exemption, it's a different asset class. Does that mean that non-residents that sell after this date are going to be able to discount up to 2012, and then, are we, obviously no one going to be able to apply the 2012 50% CGT discount after that period, but there's just no clear guidance.
No.
It's a completely different new asset class technically.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sort of provide guidance on that. And the fact is that we're in February now.
Mm-hmm.
I think from memory, it was on the order of business, wasn't it, last year?
Yep.
When we had the leadership bill.
That's right.
Yeah.
And now we've got the problem too, where obviously the Senate sat last week for 3 days.
Yep.
They're not sitting in March.
Yep.
And then they resume sitting for only 2 days, 2nd and 3rd of April.
Yep.
And call me a conspiracy theorist, but the budget is also being handed down on the 2nd of April.
Yes, that's right.
Is the government going to try and slip this one through?
Yeah.
While everyone's focused on the budget,
Yep.
no one sees the bill goes through. And I think the hardest thing for expats is they're trying to make financial decisions without the benefit of knowing if this legislation is or isn't coming into effect. So they're trying to work out whether they're going to sell their property before 30th of June or not.
Yep.
I had a chat to a reporter from the Sydney Morning Herald last week, and that article that went out over the weekend was just talking to agent after agent after agent, saying how they're just getting expats from all over the place, hitting them up, engaging them to sell their property before 30th of June. So I think expats have taken a better the devil you know, as in let's act as if the legislation is coming in, than not know. So, but, to me, there's a million Australian expats. This is the ramifications of this bill are massive, but there's no conscious thought of how that's going to affect them.
No.
And we saw that when the Senate estimates hearing happened, and then we had the Treasury officials come in.
Yes.
And that was just a bumbling mess.
Oh, it was. Even the senator that was asking the questions, he didn't know what he was asking. And
exactly.
the fact that, I can't remember the individual's name, he couldn't even answer the questions.
That's right. Yeah.
He said, listen, take it under consultation, we'll review it and come back to you. Obviously, they're not coming back to us.
That's right. That's right.
But, more on that point about a lot of expats engaging agents right now. It's a tough market. Yeah. Sydney and Melbourne, they're two key examples. People are probably still wanting to cash in on these 2017 prices, which isn't the case right now.
That's right.
I had a consult with an individual earlier that, they had a bank valuation. The valuation was, valued quite high. They're now speaking to agents, and their estimates are coming in at probably 15% less than what they got this bank valuation back in 2017. And bank valuations are usually conservative.
That's right, yeah.
So that's even more concerning.
Yep.
So you've got people, the floodgates have opened, expats might be almost panicking a little bit.
Yep.
But it does make sense. One, they're trying to cash in on the main residence exemption. Obviously, they've got that tax-free capital gain period. So it absolutely makes sense, but the fact that there's just no clear guidance yet, it's just, what do? Do you just, do you just sell out and then, you've accumulated that wealth tax-free, put it into something else, or just put it in cash, whatever it might be. But obviously, we know how it's going to be treated if they sneak it through budget time, which they have done before in the past, haven't they? They've put pieces of legislation through
all the time.
Yeah, they love it.
And also, I guess the other issue too is, now with the property market in decline, you've got time on the market spreading out, or depending on who you talk to, between 40 and 60 days.
That's right. Yep.
So if we look at 30 June, come back 60 days, people have got almost 2 months to get their property ready and on the market and get a contract.
That's right.
Or
no, you're right. Sale of contract needs to be signed before 30th of June. It can settle after. That's okay.
But now we have the problem too of people getting loans, and not just expats, but even people after the Royal Commission.
Yeah, lending restrictions.
So what are the chances of you getting a contract on the 15th of June?
Yep.
And then the contract falling over because 14 days
someone couldn't get the right
finance exactly, and next thing you know, on the 1st of July, you wake up to an email from your agent saying the contract's fallen through.
Yeah, okay.
Suddenly, your whole tax status, of your property has changed.
Well, that's right. And one other thing which I think hasn't really been mentioned too well in the market. I know there was an article in the Financial Review a few months ago, but a lot of individuals are doing private treaty sales now.
Yep.
So it means we're not actually finding out the true value of what that property sold for. It could be a lot less than what we think.
Yep.
So there is a bit of a question mark on, we're seeing these prices, we know it's dropped, but how far has it actually dropped?
Yeah.
And are people willing to bite the bullet, accept those prices, and then move on?
Well, now you have the clearance rates for auctions below 50% for everyone.
Exactly.
So with the 50% that haven't sold, are they still sitting on the market expecting 2017 prices?
Exactly.
And when they meet the market, are we going to see those prices drop again?
Yes.
As those people decide, okay, I can't sell at auction, no bidders.
Yeah.
Let's go private treaty.
Yeah.
And
then you just don't know.
Then you don't know.
Technically, they could take it off the market. They're still dealing with the obviously people that were at the auction.
Yeah.
But we'll never know the true reflection of that in the market value of that property. advertised.
Here's a common question, I think, and it came through on my email over the weekend from a client in Singapore. And he's thrown the scenario, he's been overseas for longer than 6 years.
Yes.
If he sells his property pre-30th of June,
Yes.
how is that treated?
Pre-30th of June.
Pre-30th of June. So he's been overseas for, say, 8 years.
Yes.
Obviously, the 6-year rule applies.
Yeah, it's up there.
For those 2 years,
Yep.
up until if he sells on the 30th of June,
Yeah.
how is that treated from a tax point of view?
Yeah, well, if it's before 30th of June 2019, then technically he's treated like a normal Australian tax resident. You get the partial main residence exemption on the 6-year rule.
Yep.
Obviously, 2 years, that's always going to attract capital gains tax.
Yep.
But what's not understood there is that with the main residence being technically another asset class, the 2 years he's not going to be able to discount the capital gain.
That's right.
So he'll pay tax on 2 years worth of the capital gain at his non-resident marginal tax rates, which will be quite high. And there's no rate to really get around that. But yeah, I mean, it's a common question. People are like, okay, rent it out past the 6-year rule. Yes, you're going to pay capital gains tax like the rest of us. That's normal.
Yep.
But I guess also another question is, if people choose to not sell their property, they hold on to it past this, 30th of June 2019 rule, and then they return to Australia and sell it, then does that just mean that they're still captured under the old rules? I mean, they're still under the normal main residence exemption. Yes, I've rented out that property for 10 years, I've owned it for 15, I've used up that 6-year rule. It's always going to attract capital gains tax. Technically because it's a main residence, different asset class, so you'd almost want to know whether it's worth going out and speaking to an independent valuer. Do you need to get valued at these different periods?
Exactly.
No guidance.
Yeah.
No one's providing guidance on that at the moment.
And I think that's a big thing we always talk about with clients, isn't it? Having those milestone events documented.
Yes.
Because if there is an argument with the ATO, for example, you can say with clear conviction, well, the property was worth X when I became a non-resident, it was worth Y when I became a resident, and all those sort of things.
Yeah.
Certainly drive-by appraisals from agents don't cut the mustard.
Oh.
You actually need to have a proper certified valuer to get it.
Yeah.
I've heard mixed results of bank valuations, but look, something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But certainly if you want to make sure your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, I mean, getting a valuation on a property isn't that expensive.
No.
All depending on the value of the property, you're looking at sort of $400 to $800.
Yep.
But I tell you what, if you're arguing with the ATO, you'd spend that money every day under the sun.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, usually if it's a case where you're holding an investment property portfolio, you're about to head overseas, yes, you should get it valued then, because it'll be cheaper than trying to get that valued in 10 years' time. That's normal. Historical valuations always cost a lot more. And I suppose it's that also sleep at night factor in the sense that later in life when you sell it, you've got that piece of paper that was says the value of it when you left.
Everything's demarcated accordingly.
And you've crystallised capital gain that you've accrued on the property while a normal tax resident. That way you can apply the old legislation to it. Discounting the capital gain by 50% up until that date. Anything after, obviously we can't. Yep, that's normal. But essentially, it is a sleep at night factor knowing exactly what you're going to be paying at what dates technically. So, a big advocate for obviously independent valuations.
Definitely. That leads me into the next topic I'd love to talk about is an article you wrote recently. Obviously, Bill Shorten, has been very vocal on franking credits, clearly, but also to negative gearing and all those sort of issues.
Yes.
In the article you wrote, you talked about a bit of almost like a sleeping bullet with what he's proposing, in that in the past, expats have relied upon running a property in a negative cash flow, accruing tax credits. They return to Australia, and when they come back, technically they don't pay tax on their income for a number of years, depending how many. But under what Bill Shelton's talking about, that's not the case.
No. So at the moment, as we know, we can go overseas, we can negative gear a property through the teeth, we can accumulate these net income losses or tax credits, as accountants love to refer to them as, and then later in life when we come back, if we've still got to accumulate net income losses, we can use that to offset wage income, which means a really nice tax refund the first few years. Now with these new proposed legislative changes, they want to change negative gearing to only apply to newly constructed property. They haven't announced a date, so who knows if that's going to be retrospective. It's question mark again. And essentially you can only use a newly constructed property to obviously negative gear future wage income. And then second-hand property, it can only be used to offset other investment income. So it means that if this piece of legislation goes through and you've got all these property developers, targeting expats, or, people that are doing refurbishments and, or even individuals that have these massive property portfolios now, there's not clear guidance on how they're going to be treated. yes, it's saying, listen, we're going to introduce it as of a certain date, but they really need to be clear on how current property portfolios are going to be treated. Is it meaning that as of a certain date, if you buy a property after this date, and if it's completely newly constructed, 100% you can negative gear that against net income in the future, wage income, or is it going to apply to current property portfolios? Because again, it's similar to what they want to do with their changes to superannuation. Obviously impacting retirees, franking credit policy, going after, our wealth, which would rely on current legislation to build going forward, but then they make changes where it could affect a strategy that's lasted for the last 10 to 15 years for an individual. I've personally got clients that have these net income losses accumulating on large property portfolios, and it's great because, one, we need to make sure when they come back, yes, they work for a few years, get those nice tax refunds. But again, if they introduce this piece of legislation and it's retrospective, completely damaging. So, yeah, very ridiculous.
Look, it is. I mean, I think that's probably the issue with what Shorten's talking about. It's light on detail.
Yeah.
Are we talking about retrospective on existing properties? Are we talking about, okay, if you bought an existing, like a 20-year-old house from this date on, you don't get it, but if you owned it before then, you do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many different issues there that come into play that certainly affect expats.
Oh, yeah.
And I think combine that with the market coming down, I think expats have sort of always relied upon property as a bit of a safe haven to repatriate their money to.
Exactly.
But now you've got a falling market, you've got the tax situation changing, you've got all these things coming through.
Lending restrictions.
We
know the Big Four, they're not the biggest fans of expats anymore. Ideally, usually expats are actually ideal clients.
Yeah.
But Big Four don't like them, so it's always good to use a mortgage broker to try and get that better interest rate. But you're right. I mean, the gates are slowly closing on, I suppose, not necessarily tax loopholes, but tax planning strategies that you can use over the long term, especially for expats. I mean, I know a lot of probably property developers will be treading water a bit with all these changes because they're like, okay, well, who can we spruik these properties to now?
Yep.
I know they're obviously quite popular down in the CBDs, but at the moment it's just a big question mark again.
Yeah. And I think also too, I've always sort of joked about the LinkedIn indicator. I know when I'm getting sort of 4 to 5 connection requests a day from property developers and also to buyers. That's right. You know that the market is coming down and they're trying to flog stock.
Yes.
So that has been a big spike up 6 months ago, but even now, it's coming through at a rate of knots, and I think that's the biggest thing I see. Well, if you can't sell the property, obviously they're getting out trying to expand their network to try and get rid of it, and you're seeing commissions of 30 to 40,000, per property being offered.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen people in the past, be enticed by that, and it's only led them in one direction. People are buying properties at an inflated level, and then when it comes time to sell them, they're not worth anywhere near what they bought it at.
Not at all, and obviously it's usually a case where they've either been advised by the buyer's agent to leverage that property through the roof again. I'm talking in between 80 to 90% LVR, which is crazy, and then you try and sell that property and you're actually having to fork out more of your own cash to pay off the rest of the loan.
That's right.
So they do put expats or just individuals in those situations where can't sell the property for years and years because got to wait until it turns positive again. Whether it be from an income point of view or just being able to at least break even when they sell it. You're right. Same again on LinkedIn. I've had the recent ads from all the buyers agents, mobs, and trying to engage us and putting us through their own sales process. And obviously that's not what we do. And when you hear about the commissions these individuals make, it's ridiculous. And it's just not ethical.
Certainly, if you had less scruples than we did, you'd be very tempted by these big checks. But to me, I think it's almost developing a bit of a perfect storm, because if they are trying to sell these inflated properties, to a higher market, combined with a falling market, combined with the possibility that the expats will lose their tax benefits of having property back in Australia, you could be funding a property that's worth 3/4 of its value and getting no return at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely. I mean, and you're factoring in negative gearing or the removal.
The removal.
So absolutely, there's almost no benefit there.
And you sort of just shake your head and go, well, okay.
There's other options.
We both know there's a lot of great options. I mean, there's options that rely upon a lot stronger tax incentives. Non-TARP assets, for example. That's there to encourage the billion and trillion dollar managed funds to invest in Australia.
Yeah,
exactly. If the government were, heaven forbid, to tinker with the non-TARP rules, you'd see a flight of exodus of cash out of Australia.
Absolutely.
And that's what we always talk to clients about is don't try and rely upon your wealth strategy hanging on one thin thread. Thin thread. Make sure it's part of a robust process that the government is less likely to tinker with. I mean, in saying that, we never thought they'd tinker with super.
No.
Now their hands are all over it. But I think when you look at the global scale, Australian market's 1.7% of the world market. So if we're going to encourage that inbound investment from the overseas investors, the chance of them playing with that is pretty slim.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, you mentioned superannuation, and I'm going to go back to what Labor's proposed.
Yep.
They want to reduce what we can put into super.
Yep.
I think the clawback to 75,000 non-concessional contributions. Right now, there's that new piece of legislation, the catch-up concessional contributions.
Yep.
Which is actually a really good...
it's great for expats.
Well, that's what I mean. Great piece of legislation that expats can use when they've accumulated those overseas capital gains if they need to, and deemed disposal wasn't done or anything like that. But they're looking at pulling the catch-up as well, catch-up concessional contributions, and there's rumours that they might even remove the personal deductible concessional contributions. So if all these things go through and Labor gets through, it's very concerning. I mean, obviously, a lot of financial planners, will probably be doing those, going through the process of looking at where the opportunities are for their clients going forward.
Yep.
But who knows what's going to happen after this federal election?
And it seems strange to head in a direction of try to discourage people from putting more money into super.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, sure, the great days when Howard was around, where it was go for gold.
Yeah.
But it seems to me more so the Labor camp has got in their minds that the average super fund is a $10 million super fund. And I think when the ATO released their numbers, there was only 10 super funds greater than 50 million. So they're talking about these big mega super funds, these SMSFs. But in actual fact, when you look at the average numbers, it's a lot lower than that. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the average SMSF isn't over 1 million even.
No.
It's probably honestly ranging between 300 to maybe 800,000. And anything under that, I think it's limited. You shouldn't actually have
it shouldn't be an SMSF.
I'm happy saying that actually.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Honestly, anything under 500, I wouldn't even go near it just because the ongoing costs are ridiculous. But depending on what you're doing. But that's right. I mean, they're targeting all these, or they think everyone has all their money in these huge SMSFs, but it's not true at all. And the fact that they're introducing legislation which discourages to put money away for our retirement is ridiculous because it just means its long-term effects are going to have more negative impact on Centrelink and all these
reliance on the age pension, these sort of things, and I think that's we've seen them sort of tinkering with the future fund as well.
Yes,
which that's another issue as well too, because there's that unfunded government pension liability that a lot of countries around the world are still trying to grapple with. I heard numbers the other day, something like in the UK, I think just in private defined benefit type pension funds, I think the outstanding liability in the corporates was about £500 million. Sorry, £1 billion.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
So, we've got to think about how we're going to fund those sort of things. But certainly pushing people back onto government services is not the answer.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, you and I deal with on a daily basis the confusion with expats. Can you or can you not contribute to super?
Oh, yeah.
I think I've heard every excuse under the sun as to why you can or can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, happy to go on the record today and say you can contribute to super as long as it's not an SMSF. Because then you fail the ACT members test.
Send them under control.
Yep, send them under control. And, but if you're running a retail or an industry fund, you need to check with your individual fund.
Yeah.
Some allow it, some don't. But that's more of an internal policy, not a legislative policy dictated by Canberra.
No, that's right. And the odd one kicks you out, actually.
Yes, we had that.
I've heard a few stories, but essentially, you're exactly right. I mean, there's no piece of legislation usually stating that you can't contribute to a retail super fund. Obviously, you need to make sure it's complying. They're happy having a non-resident in there. But, I mean, based on all the consults I've done, they usually hear these things from accountants, which is unusual. And the accountant is most likely referring to a self-managed super fund.
Yes.
But they probably don't say that in their email. They just say, you shouldn't contribute to your super while you're overseas. But The fact that, people won't contribute to their super for 5, 10, 15 years because they're scared to, it's ridiculous. You need to obviously grow your retirement savings. Obviously, you've got to make sure it's relevant to your overall retirement strategy, whether you're coming back to Australia to retire, whether you're retiring somewhere else.
Spot on.
Because obviously, different countries are going to tax superannuation differently. We know that. Obviously, a key example, US.
Wasn't you? You go there.
IRS, love them.
Foreign guarantor trust, employee benefit trust.
Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly right. There's no sort of clear guidance there, and they, even when you retire in the US, they'll declare as foreign sourced income. You have to report it. But it's the same with the UK as well. I think you might get a 10% exemption there, and then 9% is taxable. So you just got to be careful where you're going to retire. Obviously, safe bet is actually retiring in Australia because we know it. After you're fully retired, you're over 60s. Completely tax free.
Tax free, yep.
Which is great, but tax free for the time being.
Yes.
Let's who knows?
fast forward 20 years, and it could be a different thing. Yeah, they've worked out something way or excuse that they can tax people. So
that's right, or maybe they'll change the tax rate within it.
Yeah.
But constantly changing, and I think that's another thing I want to mention is that the red and yellow flags, the legislation red and yellow flags are constantly changing for expats.
Yes.
And it's it's keeping it your finger on the pulse to make sure you're staying within those red and yellow flags. And again, whether it's investing in property, shares, other items through unit trusts, self-managed super funds, all these things they can capture you out. And a key example would be holding a self-managed super fund when you go overseas. You're a non-resident. You've done no research on non-residency rules, central management control. And then you get audited 5 years later, and the ATO audits you and finds that your SMSF's non-complying, and the tax you have to pay, it loses all its concessions. It's taxed at the highest federal or highest marginal tax rate. Federal is going to reference the US then.
So straight up, you lose 46%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of the balance.
Of the balance, and on the income in the first year. They give you 12 months to wind it up. If you don't wind it up, they do it again. And imagine how difficult that is for people holding property. Yeah.
You can't sell a balcony off, or you can't sort
of...
That's
right.
Yeah.
So, there needs to be some clear guidance around that as well. But, these are the issues that expats face. And it's usually a case where you might read something online. You might hear something at a barbecue. And then it's, you're like, oh, geez.
Bar talk's always good. Someone in a bar in Shanghai or New York saying, oh, yeah, I did this. I got told this years ago, just do that. And how many times have we met people who, we've had to go back and clean things up after?
That's right.
And
unwind.
That's right. I think that's the popularity of SMSFs is great as long as you know that once you get on a plane, the whole premise behind having that SMSF completely changes from that point onwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can either, maintain it, which... you probably have to do if you're having property or some sort of physical asset inside there.
Yeah, there are avenues you can take. There's that temporary absence rule.
That's the 2 years.
And then depending on what you got, whether you can turn into a small APRA fund. Going down the path of changing directors, if it's a corporate trustee, all these things, but it's not something that's easy to do.
No. And I think also too, we've heard in the past before, and not to give accountants a bit of a slag, but it's normally come from accountants that, just appoint your brother and sister or son and daughter as directors or trustees of your fund and let them run it. But people have sort of always been controlling the strings in the background. And that to me is fraught with risk, because if the ATO get hold of an email, a text message, anything that shows that you are controlling the fund overseas and you're breaching CM&C, then suddenly, bang, 46 and up, off it goes. Like, you've lost all those balances.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I know we had a case last year with a gentleman who, just wanted to engage us to help him rejig his super fund, in terms of the best way to do it. And, him and his wife were the individual trustees, so we changed it to a corporate trustee. We made his son and daughter, directors of that company. But then the next thing we went to, and I think this is what most expats don't do, is as part of an SMSF, you have to have an investment strategy.
Yeah. Right.
And we did an incredibly detailed one so that his son and daughter could manage the SMSF portfolio from that investment strategy. They knew what to do if certain things happen. So it can never be argued that he was pulling the strings, because they're just going off the strategy that was outlined. Whereas I think, the big thing you got to be worried about is if the ATO called up your son and daughter who were the trustees and said, why did you do this, and they wouldn't be able to answer it.
No, not at all.
And then suddenly, next thing you know, it's, because people think central management control, I'll give my financial planner or stockbroker or accountant authority to act in the account.
Yeah,
and that's central. It's not the case.
Not
it's
the case.
that overarching type of control.
Yeah, exactly right. And I mean, there's tests that the ATO use. I think one of the main tests is where's 50% or more of the beneficial interest held. I mean, someone that's managing looking after SMSF worth $3.5 million and they don't have $1 in there.
Yep.
Why would they think that central management control is being managed by that person when
Yep.
they've got
no vested interest?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. And it's an easy argument. It really is. I mean, and you're right. All they need is an email thread. Obviously, a login. Anything that they can use, and everything's digital these days, so they can capture quite a lot.
Yep.
And it's just not worth the risk, losing essentially half your balance.
Yeah.
So, not something to, or obviously something to steer clear with, but get professional tax advice on that.
Well, people work so hard in the lead up to getting that balance, and when they don't, when they've lost it all, just because they've tried to be clever or, it's always, it's right. never for a really pragmatic reason. It's like, oh yeah, they won't get caught or, I'd be fine. Yeah. But like we've seen, especially late last year, the ATO is going to extreme lengths to get expats. Yeah. We saw that case with the gentleman in Bahrain.
Bahrain, yes, tax residency.
Huge. And just because he didn't set up permanent domicile, he lived in a service department that he could live out his suitcase.
Yeah, that's right.
They'll go to great lengths. And unfortunately, I know that there's appeals going on again, but at the end of the day, it's an expensive exercise to go through. Yeah. And not have the proper framework in place to make the most of your time overseas.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, Bahrain is an interesting case, but you can sort of see that there's clear factors there that it was easy to challenge his residency status. I mean, like you said, he was in a service apartment. He could pack up his suitcase in 30 minutes and be in the next one. And I think that's what his employer did. They actually had to keep changing to different apartments for some reason. He was an engineer, and then the majority of his family was still home, wife and kids. They were meant to come over, they were meant to buy a place, but I think they were going through a bit of a rough patch. There was actually, at the end of the day, there was a divorce involved. So they ended up only ordering him for one tax year, and that's the year that they wanted. I think it was over $90,000 worth of tax back. But essentially, it was clear because he hadn't put down roots, he hadn't established a permanent domicile, he was travelling back and forth quite regularly. He was just in that, obviously, one of the GCC areas where he, on the tax-free income, and it was just, it was easy for the ATO. It was clear to argue, and when you look on the surface, the factors are that he wasn't actually a non-resident. Yeah, and
it's actually quite easy to distinguish and qualify yourself as a non-resident. Yeah. I always talk to clients about behaviours. Do your behaviours match that of an Australian resident, or let's say you live in Dubai, a Dubai resident? Yeah. If you're sending money back to Australia to support a family and you're travelling back all the time, would a normal Dubai resident be doing that? Whereas if you, were living in Dubai, you had an apartment in your name, utility bills in your name, certainly come back to Australia for holidays, send money back for investments. Yes, a normal Dubai resident would do that.
Yeah, of course.
But it's where people get caught out is their behaviours don't match that of a resident.
Yeah, that's right.
And, certainly the ATO come calling and say, well, we don't think you've got a permanent position in that, domicile in that jurisdiction. Yeah. Certainly your father resides, that's the domicile test. Yeah. 183-day test, most people know about that, so they don't typically be caught by that, but it's the resides and domicile test. That's the big ones.
Catch everyone out. Yeah. And then, there's a super test, or superannuation test, but that's mainly for government employees. But no, that's right. And I mean, you saw that recent article from Accountants
Daily. Yep.
Board of Taxation wants to review, or they are reviewing residency at the moment. They've put together their review report, submitted to the government, and now we wait as to whether the government wants to do anything. Obviously, I think clearer guidance it is needed.
It's a grey space. Yeah. And it's too grey. And I think yes, the ATO does have that feedback on their website where people can go in and answer whether they're resident or non-resident. And the amount of people I meet go, no, the ATO website says I'm not. Yeah. But when you actually start to talk about their situation, it gets black and white to more grey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the biggest problem we've got with the legislation. I think in the article they said it's 80 years old. So it's not matching today. It doesn't take into account travelling freelancers who are sort of bouncing around, the digital nomads.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't take into account super yacht crews.
No.
It doesn't take into account people like working on deep sea divers on oil rigs. They live on a barge when they're overseas. Yeah, so, exactly. I think there's the workforce has evolved a lot. Yeah. In that time.
Oh, absolutely.
But the laws haven't changed.
Yeah,
Along with that. So, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better. So, I think what the board talked about was going just straight to a 183-day rule, which would clean up so much compliance that goes along with everything. I remember there was a case about probably 7 or 8 years ago of an engineer who was working in Saudi.
Yeah.
And because it's difficult to move money around Saudi, so he had his salary paid back to Australia, which is not really recommended.
No.
But anyway, you can sort of argue the point that, I didn't want to have a bank account in Saudi.
Yeah.
In Saudi, all the accommodation is, corporate.
Yeah.
So your employer puts you up in an apartment. Yeah. So he couldn't get a lease in his own name. But he was only back in Australia for 1 week a year.
Yeah, okay.
And actually had a house at Mudgeeraba and decided not to rent that house out because he figured he was only $50 a week better off by renting it out versus the wear and tear of it.
Oh, jeez.
So
you can see what way they're going to lean towards.
Exactly. And essentially what the ATO rested their hat on was this guy was a sporting shooter.
Yeah, okay.
In Queensland.
Yeah.
And to hold a sporting shooter's license in Queensland, there's a box that says you tick to say you're a resident of Queensland.
Oh my gosh.
So the ATO, even though this guy been overseas for 7 years, came back to Australia 1 week a year.
And every year he'd probably tick the box on the...
He did the right thing, saying visitor.
Yep.
Didn't say resident returning.
Yep.
But because of the fact that his salary was being paid back in Australia, he wasn't renting his house out, and he ticked that box with the Sporting Shooters Association.
Yeah, okay.
The ATO said you're a resident. They obviously stung him with a big bill.
Yep.
Luckily, in the Ministry of Appeals Tribunal, yes, they threw it out, which is great.
Yeah.
Because they said clearly this guy is back in Australia for 1 week a year.
Yep.
His behaviours don't match that of a resident.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a bit different that he doesn't rent the place out, but at that time too, don't forget, if you didn't rent your house out when it was a former PPR, you got indefinite MRE.
Yeah, well, that's right.
So, he can argue his way, but I'd imagine for probably 1 or 2 years fighting the ATO, it would have been an incredibly stressful experience.
Oh, absolutely. And it's good that he obviously got the right legal advice and they pulled apart the raw facts.
Yeah.
And obviously it went in his favour, but I mean, imagine paying 7 years worth of tax on the tax-free income, and he's probably on a good wicket on there as well.
Yeah, he was. He was on a very good wicket, and I think it was a bill well into the six figures.
Yeah. I mean, and he might not even have that anymore. And they're asking for this sort of, So, I mean, it's good that it did go his way, but the fact that it came down to obviously that there's some clear facts there. Yes, returning for a week. Yep, leaving his main residence, untenanted, so he's maintaining a domicile technically. And the gun license, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that held anything, I'm shocked that because I wouldn't have thought that could hold anything.
Yep.
In the courts or anything like that.
Well, obviously it's a legal declaration.
Yeah.
To the Queensland government to have that license, or the Queensland Police Service anyway.
Yeah.
So I think they relied on that legal declaration to have that license to actually work against him.
Oh my gosh.
So it's amazing. I know, we see a lot of, I guess apathy towards the incoming passenger cards.
Yeah.
People used to tick whatever the box. But what people don't realise is that when you completed that form, people thought it just gets thrown away.
No.
It actually went to a warehouse in Canberra, and within 2 weeks, that data was actually uploaded into a government portal that the Immigration Department, Centrelink, everyone could dial into and see. So if you're a resident, claiming to be a non-resident for tax purposes, but you tick the box resident returning, that is a legal declaration. And there was actually it was a deep sea diver in Perth that got caught up with this years ago, where he kept ticking resident returning.
Yeah.
And the ATO actually used that as evidence in the court to say, here's a declaration, you told us, the federal government, that you're a resident returning, so therefore you're a tax resident. So
he wasn't. His movement patterns weren't of technically a foreign resident.
No.
Returning as a visitor.
Yeah,
and
that's
on
right.
the ATO, that's what they refer to everyone as, foreign resident. It's not non-resident, it's foreign resident, and that's where I think a lot of people get confused. As well. I've had a lot of consults where I'm an Australian tax resident, but I'm non-resident. So okay, well, the foreign resident tax rates are going to apply to you, and they sort of get shocked when it's like, oh, I'm going to get taxed 32.5% on my rental income, which isn't what you want. But no, that's really interesting. That obviously, he could have probably sought advice on what to tick on the returning card, and that would have saved him thousands in tax.
In his case, it was very messy because he was on barges and he was a contractor, and his employer wasn't really forthcoming with the ATO in terms of what they thought his status was.
Okay.
So they disappeared in the background and left him to fight his own battle. He also had a wife living in Perth.
Yep.
So his behaviours matched that of a resident.
Okay, yeah.
So it wasn't too hard to justify, but it was amazing how much precedence the ATA placed on that incoming passenger card in terms of what box you're ticking. And I think we also see this from time to time with Medicare, with Aussie expats.
Absolutely. Yep.
They think because they're expiries for 5 years that they can still use it. And even when you go on the Medicare website, it actually says that you can use your Medicare card as a non-resident. But when you're a non-resident, you're not paying the Medicare levy.
No, you're not funding it anymore.
So you're not paying that funding. So therefore, the ATO turns around and says, "Well, look, what are you? What's going on here?" And that's also caught a lot of people out as well too.
Yeah, absolutely.
They hear from Medicare to say, "Yeah, you can use it." But they don't understand the tax implications on the other side. That can catch them out as well too. So
obviously the systems talk. I mean, these days everyone's usually got a MyGov login, and if they've gone online and linked the ATO service, the MyGov service, in the Medicare service, then obviously, if you're using Medicare after 5 years, you're really running the gauntlet, to be honest.
Yeah, that's right.
You're better off just paying for an upfront consult. What is it going to be, $50 to $80 these days?
Versus 20 or 30, exactly right. Yeah.
And I mean, essentially, it's saving you, obviously, that tax residency issue.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people forget that. And I've heard of cases where I've had consults and someone's come back after being away for 8 years. They've used Medicare and there was no issues, but then they went back overseas and then their mother received a funding letter from Medicare about tax residency, which is unusual.
Yep.
And after that, he stayed overseas, he hasn't come back. I mean, the systems talk, and everything's shared these days, data feeds, so it's not worth running the risk when it comes to tax residency at all.
Not at all. Actually, we had a client who was receiving, I think it was Family Tax Benefit B. That's the non-means tested one, I think it is. And he went overseas for work.
Yeah.
And wife and kids are still in Australia.
Okay, yep.
But they saw him leave, and after 2 weeks they turned it off.
Oh.
So he had to actually call them up to say, no, I haven't left the country. I'm actually travelling for work.
Yeah.
And they turned it back on again.
Oh, wow.
So it just goes to show how connected all the dots are.
Yeah.
In terms of,
I'd actually thought it would take a lot longer.
Yeah, no, it's 2 weeks. Yeah. Because apparently, and I've heard mixed stories about this, you meant to tell, them about any travels and those sort of things, and and they he spoke to someone and they said, "Oh, you should let us know next time." He's like, "Well, certainly will."
Yeah.
But I couldn't believe it. After 2 weeks, this got turned off. So I don't know how they knew it was a work trip versus a holiday trip or what.
How would you prove that? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit, but it just goes to show there is a lot of confusion in that area still.
Yep.
And even though some government bodies are defined in their opinion, others are differing, and you can be very confused by calling up one and expecting that answer to be cross-pollinated across to another government agency as well too. So they've got all their own little different rules and regulations. And
and I think if it's a case where you know that your own situation is very grey, then you need to go and speak to a tax accountant in that field and possibly request a private ruling.
Yep.
You're going to have that reassurance knowing whether, yes, you're a tax resident or you're non-resident. If they deem you to be a tax resident, then you're going to have a bit of a criteria on why you're being deemed a tax resident and to what extent you need to make changes, obviously, to your lifestyle and everything to make sure you are a non-resident. Stay away. Obviously, don't maintain a previous main residence and keep it vacant because you're maintaining a domicile. It's all these actual clear things that people just don't think about.
Yep.
Essentially, especially if you get in those low tax rate environments or the tax-free environments, then it might be beneficial to become non-resident and not come back for a very long time.
I think that's a great point because we've always joked about when people are about to move overseas, they Google where the kids go to school, where you go to live, what the restaurants are like, all those fun things. Yeah. But 9 times out of 10, no one seeks advice.
No.
And they jump on a plane and, I think it's something like 18,156 people a month move overseas for a period of greater than 12 months.
Yep.
And I guarantee, probably 98% of those people would never have gone through the process.
No.
But the biggest risk is, on so many different levels, whether it's obviously the proposed main residence exemption changes, whether it's deemed disposal with shares and ETFs and managed funds, you can go through all these different asset classes and fly on red flags. SMSFs.
Huge.
The amount of times people come to us a year after they're overseas and go, wait a minute, I've just found out that I can't have an SMSF and I've been overseas for a year.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, longer.
Or, I mean, I've got a client right now that I'm going through the process of helping wind up, and actually several. And they've been overseas for longer than 2 years. Mm-hmm. So I think the gates were closing, and it was only a matter of time. But no, you're exactly right. Different asset classes, different rules. And what's funny is that, that large, amount of people heading overseas each month, that for a period of greater than 12 months, they might mention it to their accountant if they have an accountant, and it's common that those accountants don't have any exposure to international matters. So they'll play it safe, and they'll say, listen, you're still going to be a normal tax resident, don't worry about it, it's all good. But that's not usually the case at all.
No.
And it's, we've come across cases where an individual's been overseas for 2 to 3 years, but they're still deeming themselves to be a normal Australian tax resident.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And then you go through the criteria, you go through what they've left behind, and you're shocked that a normal, suburban accountant, has deemed them to still be an Australian tax resident, because it could be the case where they might need to do a few amended tax returns because they paid tax when they didn't need to.
Yep.
So I know, a little while ago, I think I told you about a referral onto another accountant. They helped get a huge tax refund because they had to obviously do an amended tax return, but that person's case was very clear.
Yep.
Very clear. There was no
definite non-resident.
Exactly. There was no black and whites. They just used your budget accountant, and they continued using a budget accountant, and the budget accountant didn't know anything about international matters, so they err on the side of caution.
Yep.
Play it safe. But obviously it was a good tax refund for him. Yeah.
I had one where client of ours playing rugby in Europe.
Yep.
And he receives a number of payments, image rights, sponsorship, those sort of things.
Yeah.
And his agent actually sent the money back to Australia, and their former Australian accountant, because we've changed all that, which is good.
Yep.
Just deemed this as Australian income.
Okay.
So even though they were non-residents, they're back in Australia probably 3 weeks a year.
Yeah.
So
he's playing for one of the teams over there.
He's playing, one of the French teams.
Yeah.
And the accountant actually misdeclared their income.
His income.
Instead of their income being sourced overseas and paid overseas.
Yeah, it's foreign income.
Foreign
income.
It
shouldn't get captured by
That's
ATO
right.
at all.
Yeah. So this accountant actually declared it as Australian income.
Geez, I wouldn't imagine it would have been a small amount either.
Not at all, 6 figures.
Yeah.
So, it's
Jeez.
One of the things we talk to clients about is the importance of working with people who know, and I call it match fit, in doing what they're doing. Yep. How many, whether it's an accountant, a mortgage broker, a financial planner, doesn't matter who it is. The first question they need to ask is, how many other expat clients do you have?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're dealing with this on one case once a year, you would not be aware of all the other moving parts that happen on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis in this space.
No, you're not a specialist.
No. And, so many times we see people get caught out because they just relied upon that person's, good faith to say, okay, you obviously know what you're talking about.
Yep.
Instead of sort of saying, to that specialist or that professional, how much experience do you have in working with this space?
Yeah.
Because time and time again, we come across situations where people have just been led down the garden path when the smallest change done 3 years ago would have had far better results.
Yeah, well, that's right. And touching back on the specialists that you were just mentioning, those are the type of individuals that we're going to be working to this webinar.
Yes, definitely.
Throughout the year. So, ideally, talking once to a different individual from a different industry.
Yep.
Ideally talking about the issues that individuals face when they go overseas. I can't wait to talk to Jeremy Harper.
Yeah, about mortgages. Yep.
Obviously, relevant tax accountants, and then obviously the legal side as well.
Yeah, with Naomi Seddon from Littler.
Right.
And that's an interesting one. That expats in other countries don't tend to face as much, but Australian expats in the US face a lot. Whether they're going on an E3 and also what Washington's decisions are on those changes with those type of visa classifications, because we've heard different stories about them cracking down on E3s and those sort of things. So it's going to be great to get someone in just to give us that coalface. Okay, here's what happens on a daily basis. To me, obviously Darko with risk insurance. That'd be great, because that is one that is. I think there's a lot of mistruths around risk insurance. Just because a particular insurer knocks you back for insurance doesn't mean it's illegal. And I've heard that a couple of times. In actual fact, it's the insurer's appetite for expat risk.
Yeah.
And there's those sort of key cutoff points and key issues that sort of they look at.
Yeah.
Time overseas, intentions to return to Australia, ties to Australia. There's a lot that goes into it. Whereas if you're working with a risk advisor who hasn't had a lot of experience with expat, life insurance, TPD, and so forth, they would just assume, okay, I can't get risk.
Yeah.
When in actual fact, it's just that particular insurer.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't want to expat clients.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there is that many different types of insurance providers in Australia.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's obviously it's wise speaking to a specialist that's obviously deals with the international matters daily. And you're right, the timeframes do have a big impact. Time overseas, intentions remaining overseas, when you're coming back.
Yep.
All these factors play in, as well as even where you're residing.
Yes.
So I know a lot of insurance providers, they don't like some countries.
Yes.
Obviously, the DFAT 5. That's
clear, that's right. No life insurance for people in Baghdad.
Well, exactly right. It's a bit of a no-brainer, but essentially, I mean, a lot of these insurance providers, they still do provide expats with great insurance, as well as income protection insurance.
Exactly.
And it's a shame that a lot of people, they are unfortunately exposed to those overseas type insurance bond products.
Yeah.
I'm not a specialist in them, but I haven't heard great stories.
Look, at the end of the day, there's a reason why they were stopped being used in Australia and the UK back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
They're an old, antiquated, expensive product that, during the time when financial services weren't that sophisticated, it was probably the easiest way for someone to invest and sort of protect themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
But now there's 100 other products out there that are cheaper, more liquid, more flexible. The list goes on. Now we're sort of seeing the providers of those products are shrinking down from worldwide now down to sort of Asia and Middle East.
Becoming localized.
And look, the regulators are cracking down too. You've got Hong Kong regulators cracking down. And I think when they did that, was it last year or year before, there was a 40% fall in the first month of these products being sold.
Okay.
I know in Dubai, the same thing's occurring right now. They're talking about capping commissions.
Commissions? Yes, I was reading that article.
So, people don't realise all the embedded commissions behind these products.
Yeah, exactly.
They can be investing in what they call shadow portfolios.
Yes.
So they're actually paying 2 MERs.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of smokes and mirrors behind it.
Yeah.
And expats don't need it now.
No.
That's the funny thing. Go and get proper product advice by a specialist and you won't have all these issues. I mean, Google the term, offshore IFA, cold call.
Yeah.
And you'll have 45,000 pages on Google talking about people's, experiences with all these different mobs. And you don't need it.
No.
There's no requirement. There is no requirement to have that. The great thing about, sourcing Australian risk insurance is, especially if you intend to return back to Australia, it continues.
Yeah, exactly.
You just change your residency status with the underwriter.
Yep.
It's whereas you're not trying to use a offshore insurance model in Australia, and there's no flexibility for Australian expats.
No, you're right. And I think one, I suppose, I'd call it tax issue. I mean, a lot of these insurance products you pay into them, and then sometimes you'll get actually a benefit paid out to you after that term.
That's right.
Now, if you're still holding that product when you come back to Australia, and it's one of those products where there's no tax being paid within it itself, then once you receive that payout, you go and take that to an accountant. The accountant's going to go, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah.
How do I treat this?
And that's unfortunate. There's all the big platforms that everyone's heard the names, like Generali and Friends Provident and all those sort of things, and they've sort of flown under the same radar as the Australian bond providers.
Yes.
Whereas the difference with Australia is those bond providers pay tax to the ATO every week, every month on your behalf.
Yeah.
So when you hold those bonds for 10 years, you're entitled to tax-free because it's been paid on your behalf.
Yeah, paid as you go on your behalf. Yep.
Whereas the foreign bond providers, they say, we're the same too, but they don't pay a cracker to the ATO. So at some point, and it might be next week, next month, next year, 10 years' time, with the way that legislation is changing and the government's realising, wait a minute, we can get revenue from expats.
Yeah.
Surely they've got to crack down on that.
Yeah.
And what happens if you just signed up to a 10-year savings bond?
Yeah.
And they change the legislation?
Yeah.
You've still got to go through, and you're in for 2 years.
Yeah.
You got to hold that thing for 8 years.
Yes.
And that's not to get the tax benefit. That's so you don't pay a penalty when you exit the product.
Yes, the exit.
I had a case where a client tried to exit one a 10-year bond at 5 years.
Yep.
And he was going to be hit with, I think it was a 76% capital penalty.
Jeez.
So, he's got to pay tax on it anyway. And so it's a whole mess. And that's probably one of the biggest things. And that's why it's great to do these sort of things, is just to get out there and just to educate expats on what's going on. Like, if you do get a phone call from these people, what do you say?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, your life with Australia from a financial perspective stopped.
Yes.
As soon as you got on that plane, you could do what you want, carry on. But then when you came back to Australia, you transferred your money back, and the Australian government, the ATO, really had no idea what you were doing.
No.
These days, with all the data sharing agreements, whether it's the Common Reporting Standard, and FATCA with the US, the ATO knows more about you than you think they know.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you're a expat in Denmark and you've told your bank, and you have to do these days, that you're an Australian citizen, you provide your Australian tax file number, or what they call the TIN, the tax identification number, then every year they've got to pass that data of your bank accounts straight back to the ATO.
Yeah, well, on that topic, I had a consult the other day. The individual, he hadn't updated any information with the ATO or anything, but he'd been away for 6 months. He was staying over for a long time. He actually got a letter from his bank saying, listen, we've noticed that there's been changes in your tax residency. Could you please, fill out this form within 30 days? So the fact that there obviously is a lot more data sharing than we realise, and that might be a case where maybe they've pulled that from his card, the passport card leaving Australia.
Yep.
Who knows? But the fact that he hadn't told the ATO yet, but his bank knew.
Yeah.
So something's being shared there.
Yep, that's right.
And whether it's a case, he's obviously got his TFN on his Australian bank account, and then obviously he's got a newly created TIN on his overseas bank account. That information's been shared by CRS, and they're picked up, and then that's why they said, listen, we noticed that your tax residency might have changed, therefore you either update it or we'll update it for you.
Interesting one for you. The only country, I think there's about over 100 countries and territories that have signed up to the CRS. Bahamas, BVI, Liechtenstein, all these countries. But the only country that hasn't signed up to the CRS, United States.
It's ridiculous.
So essentially, United States is now a tax haven for Australian expats because they don't have to share data back to the ATO. Only if it's on a request basis, and only if there's like more criminal proceeds and all that sort of
do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, no, because they were the first people championing this cause, because that's what FATCA is.
Yeah,
is their own version of CRS.
Yeah,
and they've bullied everyone into signing FATCA.
Yeah,
but they're like, no, we're not going to sign CRS because we don't want to be obligated to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
ridiculous.
So if you want to hide money, don't put it in Panama, put it in the United States. So
you don't have to opt into it or anything.
Exactly, that's right. So it's a strange one, and you can see why expats get so confused.
Yeah.
It's changing so quickly. The world for expats is becoming a very small space.
Yes.
Gone are the days of, where did James go? And 10 years later, you suddenly pop back up on the radar.
Yep.
It's almost like they've got a map and they're just following around the dots.
Yeah, exactly.
They know exactly where you are. The government agencies, as much criticism as they get for being antiquated, are not anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they've realised there's actually a revenue benefit for them being on the money.
Oh, absolutely. Tax evasion.
They can have tax evasion. They can chase all this money. Obviously Operation Wickenby.
Yep.
I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars they got out of that. But it's not going to get any better. A client said to me the other day, he said, when's the pressure going to come off us? It's like, never. This is the new norm.
It's going to get worse.
It is, and that's why it's incredibly important to do the right thing the right way.
Exactly.
There's no reason why you can't go overseas and make money and invest and all these things, but just do it in the 2019 fashion, not in the 2009 fashion or the 2000 fashion. Because I think the world is changing a lot, and we're seeing the government bodies using Facebook data, like all these other things, to support their cases. And I think people just need to say, well, this is it.
Yeah.
So it's time to clean up. I know you had a case not long ago where I don't know how many tax returns this guy had to do.
Oh, it's 15 years worth.
Yeah.
But what was scary is he owned an apartment block in Noosa.
Yep.
Had done one. Rental property, rental income, no mortgage on it. So obviously a wealthy individual, non-resident, obviously rental income attracts marginal tax rates.
That's right.
2.5%. Obviously his
on the first dollar.
Yeah, on the first dollar. His was obviously over 90,000, so we're talking 37 and 45%.
Yeah.
So we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tax that needed to be paid there, and I mean he was just under the assumption, I went overseas, I was no longer a tax resident. Why should I have to pay tax on that income? So what's Australian source? I mean, Australian
That's
sourced income pays tax to the ATO, and then depending on where you are in the world, might mean you'll get a foreign tax credit for that income. As an example in the US or wherever, UK. But essentially, it's just putting your head in the sand and just ignoring it, and then usually it's a case where if you repatriate, you come back, it's you're going to get a nasty letter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's amazing when we've met people like that and helped them get through it, and you almost look at their face. It's just like this relief. They've had this burden over them. I remember chatting to a gentleman in Beijing a number of years ago, and his wife sort of pushed him up to me and said, "Can you have a chat to him?" And I'm like, "Okay, what's this about?" And they hadn't done tax returns in 6 years, and he was just almost frozen by fear of what would happen if he did it. And I said to him, I said, "Look, is it positive or negatively geared?"
Yeah.
And he goes, "Negatively geared."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, so you've been putting money in every month?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "So..."
It's got an accrued tax benefit then.
I said, "You actually owe you money."
Yeah.
And the look on this guy's face, and the wife started crying. I'll never forget it. The wife started crying. She's like, "You have no idea how much stress this has caused us for the last 5 years.
Oh, gosh.
And the first thing we're going to do is do these returns."
Yeah.
And, it's misinformation is so important. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to do this all on these different channels, is to get out there to talk to expats and say, hey, you've heard X, it's actually Y.
Yeah, well, that's another issue. The internet. I mean, you can Google a bias for anything, and there's just so much grey out there. And I mean, again, it's why we have a podcast like this where we can try and cut through a lot of the crap that's out there.
Exactly.
Like you can, Google Dr. WebMD. Got cancer, whatever it might be.
That's right.
But it's not the case. It's not the case at all, and you just need to speak to an individual that actually is a specialist.
Well, I think that the biggest problem that expats find is they can find the information, but they don't know how the dots join.
Yeah. Okay.
Then they can see this, but how does that affect them? And the US with superannuation is a classic example.
Yeah, that's right.
We're not even talking about PFICs, passive foreign investment companies. We're just talking at the higher level with foreign grantor trust versus employee benefits trust.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's a lot of not press, but there's a lot of articles out there by people saying, no, you don't have to declare it at all. Then there's a small fraction out there who are saying, oh, we can use this as a privatised social security. Most people don't have a high level of financial literacy.
No.
There might be MDs or doctors or engineers, might be brilliant at what they do, but when it comes to understanding finances, they don't actually have a lot of experience behind it.
No.
So they would blindly go with what they read, and they read an article that says you don't have to declare your superannuation to the IRS because of this, and they go, okay, well, that guy looks legit, and the IRS doesn't care.
Yeah.
They'll still go after you, whether you heard who you heard it from. So I think that's one of the big things we're looking for to getting these out there is really just bringing in some home truths.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of information out there for expats in general.
Yeah.
But we're bringing it down to what we do, specialise in Australian expats, bring it down into that special case, and then, just pretty much talk about the honest truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But, it is the truth. And I think with the government's way they're going, it's just going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, absolutely.
People don't realise that the Australian expat community would actually take up, I think it's Canberra, Wollongong, Hobart, and Darwin.
Oh, jeez, wow.
So it's a big group out there.
Yeah.
And to me, they're not taken seriously enough.
No.
So
it'll be interesting to get some statistics actually from the Expats Insight Survey.
Yes, that's actually another thing I want to talk about as well too. Was right now coinciding with Australia Day on the 26th of January, we launched our Expat Insight Survey. We did the same survey last year. We had 1,774 people from 65 countries. We're about 3 weeks into it now, and we've had almost 1,300 people from 80 countries.
Amazing.
We're running this until the 31st of May. So jump on our website, have a look under News Survey, under the section of menus there. Love to get everyone's responses and feedback. Essentially, the survey serves two purposes, actually three purposes. The first purpose is, it gives us the coalface feedback from expats in different countries as to, from a family point of view, from a career point of view, from a finances point of view, from a lifestyle point of view, is it a good place to move to or not? in the past, expats have normally found that out after they've moved there.
Yeah, of course.
So that information, we aggregate the data, and talk about specific countries and regions. Then also too, expats who are already overseas, looking to relocate to another country.
Yeah.
They don't know if they're going from New York to Dubai. Their experience is New York, not Dubai.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is just make that process as informative as possible. And lastly, and this is starting off what we talked about with the main residence exemption and just how there's such a lack of understanding by Canberra on what an expat is. We're able to get this data together and show Canberra.
Absolutely.
We're not showing them people's IP addresses or anything.
No.
We were just sort of talking about
the types.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a misconceived idea in Canberra that the average expat is a C-suite executive earning $1 million a year.
Yeah.
In actual fact, I can sort of almost remember the numbers from last year. I think 22% or 23% of respondents were teachers.
Yeah, education. Yep.
And then just behind that was nurses and health.
Yep.
And behind that was hospitality. So, the vast majority aren't high-flying expats with, massive packages.
Yeah.
They're actually people that, the government always talks about hard-working Australians.
Yeah.
They're the hard-working Australians. They just happen to live overseas.
It's the exact criteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the more people that do participate in this survey, I guess the more seriously Canberra has to take it.
Yeah. And are we going to, with the raw data itself, we're going to be putting it together and...
Yeah, so virtually what we're going to do is 3 things with it. So the first thing will be on our website, we'll have some country guides.
Yes.
So it'll run through, is this a good place to work? Is it a good place to raise a family?
Yep.
From our point of view, we have to have a minimum number of respondents in that country or city to make the
sample size.
To make the sample size big enough.
Yep.
Obviously, if we have 2 respondents, then it's not really indicative of that place.
No.
The second thing is using the guides more so not from a Canberra's point of view, but also too from an expat's point of view, because expats by virtue and look at our client base. I call them satellites.
Yeah.
They're always just sort of orbiting the planet.
Yeah.
And yes, Google's great for researching moving to a different country, but more often than not, you don't actually have comments from Australian expats in that country.
No.
Facebook groups has certainly gone some way to helping that, but in terms of combining that feedback with the numbers, what is the average income of an Australian expat in that country?
Yeah.
Is the work environment better than Australia? Those are big things as well. Certainly, using the information lobby Canberra.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to tell Canberra that their preconceived ideas of an expat is completely wrong. They're not all earning $1 million.
Yeah.
They're not high-flying executives. To me, the biggest one we look at is always, a nurse might move to Saudi Arabia, still on the same income she was in Australia.
Yep.
But she's able to save more because she's not paying tax in Saudi Arabia.
Tax-free income. Yep.
But it doesn't mean she's earning $1 squillion.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think we need to get around with Canberra is really change that that conceived idea that we'll make these tax changes and they can afford it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they can't.
That mentality. Yeah, exactly right.
They can't. So if you haven't already done it, please, if you could fill out the survey, that'd be great. So just go to we'll have a box on the front page on our homepage. Just scroll down a bit, you'll see a box that says Start Survey. The website is www.atlaswealth.com.au. So certainly love as much feedback as possible, because it's a weighted numbers thing. If the number's too small, Canberra won't take it seriously.
No.
And also too, the data's not relevant enough to the general population.
We need the sample size.
Exactly so.
We do. So obviously get on there, fill it out, be as honest as you can. Obviously you can do it anonymously as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you want to report, then you can also enter your email at the end as well.
Exactly.
So ideally, sending that through to Parliament would be great.
It'd be good. It needs to be done. It hasn't been done in the past. Last year's survey was, from what we know, the largest survey of Australian expats ever done.
Yep.
But this year, instead of 1,700, we want double and triple that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The bigger the numbers, the better. So definitely everyone's support will be greatly appreciated in doing that. So.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
I suppose as we round out today's podcast,
yes.
What have Aussie expats got? I suppose just the US, isn't towards the end of the month?
Yes.
Webinar with Glenn Hines.
Yep. Webinar with Glenn Hines.
Yep.
So, and then next month, I think we've got Darko talking about risk insurance.
Yes.
And then after that, we've got
the budget update.
The budget update. Yep.
Absolutely. That's
so
huge.
Budget's coming forward to April, 2nd of April. So expats are always a low-hanging fruit in that sort of case. So we're always expecting with fingers in our ears, what's going to happen. But we'll obviously usually the day after the budget, we'll run a live webinar to talk about the key issues.
Q&A.
So as you can see, we've got a lot on.
Yep.
I've actually thought of a good title. I think these chats, let's call them expat chats.
Yep.
Because that's what they are.
They are.
Certainly, by all means, tag us with #AskAtlas or send us an email, info@atlaswealth.com.au if you've got any questions you'd like to be raised for the next one. We'll do 2 of these a month, so keep things current. And by all means, if you listen to this on the podcast, please hit subscribe. Please also give us a rating. With no ratings, no one's going to find us. So help your fellow expats out by doing it. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, by all means, please like and subscribe. And share. The best thing about Atlas is we couldn't have existed in today by doing what we do today 20 years ago.
No.
Because digital media and those communication tools weren't there. So
connects us. Exactly
right, but if we look at the information we put out on a weekly basis, it is shared, which is great. And it's I guess that big global community that Australian expats are. If we can all keep sharing this information, there's no mistruths, there's no innuendos, there's no urban myths. Everyone's getting educated, which is our main ethos is educate. Because then you make smart decisions after that. So
absolutely, and I think a lot of expats are always concerned that their issue is rare or unique. It's not. And usually, if it's the case when you're on these live webinars and you're asking a question, if you sit back and you wait, you'll probably find the question will actually get asked before you even ask it. A lot of expats, doesn't matter where you are, they're usually facing the same issues.
Yes.
So you are technically you're a collective community.
Exactly.
A global community that has the exact same issues. And whether you're going to ask the question, someone will. So. No,
definitely. So I know people are quite often a little bit nervous about asking questions in a live forum. So as I said, if you've got any questions that either you'd like us to address personally or in the podcast or in these chats or on the forum, by all means, send us an email at info@atlaswealth.com.au.
Sounds great, Brett.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. And we'll see you guys on the next Expat Chats.
See you guys.
Cheers.